Okay, they've started the recording. Uh, Thank you again for those that have stayed for the second webinar. For those that are new, my name is Jackie Jacob. I'm at the University of Kentucky. I'm a poultry specialist dealing mostly with small and backyard flocks. I'm the coordinator for the E-Extension Small and Backyard Flocks Community of Practice. I put together the webinars and the educational material that you can find online at our website, which I will put in the chat box shortly. It was an interesting webinar that we had on avian influenza and the problems on the West Coast, but as he said at the end, it could spread to other states because of the various flyways. West Coast flyways, not the only one. And so we have Dr. Gregory Martin from Penn State University, who's going to talk to us about biosecurity to try and prevent our birds from getting sick, whether it be avian influenza or any other disease. All yours, Greg.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak this afternoon or this evening, depending on what time zone you're in. I am a member of the community of practice with E-Extension, along with Dr. Jacob, and this is an important topic to think about simply because of not only the outbreaks out west, but Ebola has been in the news, as well as our friend Salmonella enteritidis. That's what this is up here in the top left-hand corner. Salmonella is a bacteria that we need to protect ourselves against, as well as viruses such as avian influenza and, of course, Ebola. So biosecurity is something that we need to think about. And during my talk, I might use some terms that may be foreign to you, so I thought I would go over those very quickly. For example, a fomite is an object like a shovel or a bucket or a pair of boots that would help spread a disease, whether it be bacterial or viral in nature. A fomite is just objects that are carriers of diseases from one point to another. That is versus a vector. And we just heard in our last talk the spread of avian influenza by waterfowl flying through the Pacific Flyway. That would be a vector-transmitted disease. So when we speak of vectors and fomites, sometimes you'll hear that in the news. This is what they're talking about. And later on, we're going to talk a little bit about preventing diseases from happening on our locations simply by the use of chemicals. And so if you read the bottles, you'll see different types of terms, sanitizers versus disinfectants. So to sterilize means to eliminate all microbes or to at least inactivate them so that they do not become contagious to anybody. So when you think about steam cleaning something, that is a way of sterilizing. An autoclave is very similar to that, and it kills everything. To sanitize, for example, though, is to reduce the amount of microbes to below a safe level to where it won't pose a problem of overrunning a person or a bird's immune system. To disinfect means to inhibit the growth of microbes or viruses on a surface. So fomites, when we disinfect a sink or boots or our shovels, that's what we're talking about. We're trying to inhibit the growth of further bacteria or viruses on those surfaces by the use of a disinfectant. So it's an inhibitory type of process. And then anything with the word "side" in there means to kill. So a biocide, for example, is a product that kills things. So when you see any word that has the CIDE at the end, that is something that is a control for both viruses and bacteria. So when I talk about biosecurity, the important thing to remember that biosecurity is more an attitude than a practice. If you think about it, I see a lot of times in commercial environments, things that we put in place to help improve biosecurity on the farm. So it takes an active role on everybody's part to ensure that these protocols are being followed. So you have to have the attitude of making sure that you use all the available tools in your arsenal to help prevent both bacteria and viruses from invading your farm or your flocks. And so I've actually seen and followed people into a facility, for example, that would bypass a foot bath or bypass a washing station. And I would call out to them and say, this is not the intention of the farm. They put this here for a reason, and we need to go back through and do some proper biosecurity roles in washing and dipping boots. So again, it's always an attitude. They have the right attitude, you'll have the right kind of control on your farm. So when we think of biosecurity, I always like to split it up into 3 layers to help protect our flocks. No matter what size the flock, if we enact these 3 levels of control, we're going to get an adequate type of biosecurity on our location. And so I always speak of it as a physical control, a chemical control, and most importantly, a logical control against disease. And if we think about it as an entire farm or location type of protection plan, you should have elements of all 3 of these layers in place to help protect your flocks. So the physical layer. This is probably the most logical one we see. We actually place physical barriers to fomites and vectors. So this is where we get the idea of clothing, the idea of putting chickens and other birds in housing. The idea of time and distance is common physical barriers. So here's a good example of things that go wrong. Here we have, this is a picture from China where they're under quarantine for a high-path avian influenza break, and so we have people in physical personal protective gear, and yet we have children that are being exposed to contagious product here because they're not wearing anything, no respiratory or eyewear protection. And if you look really closely here, this person and this person isn't properly wearing their eye protection. So if they had a spill or leakage of any biological materials from the bag, they could infect themselves as well. So having the equipment and properly using it is an important part to this physical layer. It doesn't really have to cost much. It could be something as simple as rubber overshoes that you would wear over your own shoes. Purchasing rubber footwear like these Crocs. There's other types of footwear out there as well. And leaving them at each station or each house that you may have at your location so that you're not transmitting agents from one spot to another. Clothing are great because they can be washed, they can be reused, they can be sanitized, and thereby breaking the cycle between farms or between buildings even as you're moving through flocks, as you're servicing flocks, as you're feeding and watering your poultry. This is especially true if you have mixed poultry, where you have maybe chickens and turkeys, turkeys and waterfowl, or a variety of all of the above. So having this physical layer actually puts a block between the different groups that you may have. So you don't want to become, a vector to disease. So anything that you may carry, both on your person and on surfaces of equipment that you bring around, needs to be accounted for. Usually the cleaner and the tidier you keep your your poultry, the better off you're going to be. Having good air circulation where you can dry your pens out and have good airflow through the pens are very, very important to help prevent anything from building up and incubating. And then again, the distance between pens, especially when you have multiple age birds on one location, is very important. You try to, what we call compartmentalize, where you're trying to keep small numbers in one spot so that if something gets sick, it's not going to be in the entire flock. And then, most importantly, having a separate zone or a separate area on your location to handle birds that are both new to the flock or birds that might be returning from shows or from displays that you're bringing off and on to the farm. You never know what you may pick up at a fair or at a poultry show, and so I always recommend to those that are showing poultry to make sure you have a landing zone somewhere on the farm that's away from the major population, especially your breeding stock, to see if these birds will indeed get sick, and if they are sick, then they're going to be isolated and quarantined from the rest of the birds on the farm. This also includes this idea of physical barriers, includes larger equipment as well. You don't want to park your cars close to your poultry pens. You only want to come in for deliveries. You want to make sure that you keep your vehicles clean and your handling and transportation materials clean as well. So that might mean taking your coops and other crates that you're moving poultry with and going to the car wash and washing that equipment off before the next use. You should log visitors to your farm or to your location. For smaller flocks, I always use the idea of a guest book because it comes off a little bit easier, you know, to write your name into a guest book. That tells us who is at your flock at a particular time. So the other thing is that I try to limit as many people as possible from going into the actual structures that I have in place, simply because I can't always guarantee I know where that person has been, and so we try to limit visitors into the structures. I always limit it to those who just absolutely really need to be there. With Facebook and camera phones and other things, you know, you can always show pictures of your poultry. You don't necessarily need to be in there. If you do happen to have somebody come onto your farm, you may want to consider having coveralls and boots. You know, if you get a size 3X coverall and a size 13 or 14, 15 boot, most people could fit in those sizes very easily, and so you could protect your flock from someone coming onto the farm. You never know when that's going to be. So the next layer of protection that I always like to put up in my biosecurity program is a chemical layer. Now, chemical layers are those agents that we use to help knock down both viruses and bacteria on the farm. But sometimes it's hard to determine whether I'm getting an effective control, simply because you're spraying a material onto a piece of equipment or structure and you're assuming that it's working. You can't always do that. So you have to follow a good protocol to ensure a good result. When you're using chemical controls, you cannot cut corners either by diluting your materials, over diluting your materials to help extend them, or to improperly apply these things, simply because if they're improperly applied or not applied in the proper concentrations, you're not going to get an adequate control for the types of agents that you're trying to protect yourself from. So my adage is to always apply these disinfectants and other agents to only clean surfaces, simply because this will help aid the kill of these agents against viruses and bacteria. Just to show you an example of what can happen, this is 2 agar plates here of a person who didn't wash their hands and then went ahead and washed their hands. And you can see that people and animals do carry bacteria on them. And you know, this is something that we are always protecting ourselves upon. So the idea of washing washing hands with just soap, in fact, will get us to this to a certain degree. And then the use of maybe a sanitizer or an alcohol-based hand sanitizer would get us even beyond these little colonies here. Now there is a question here. How can you get control on an organic farm with no chemicals? Well, there are certain agents that are approved as sanitizers on the farm. You need to look at the what we call the blue book or the green book, the OMRI book, and under sanitizers they do have that there. For example, I think vinegar is an approved substance. It has a higher acid content that could be used as an organic sanitizer. But again, the main point is that you got to have a clean surface before you can disinfect properly. And so the idea is to remove as much organic material and dirt, which leads us right here. You need to learn to wash first and then apply a disinfectant. Whenever I'm going onto a farm or to visit a small flock, I always make sure that my boots are totally clean before I apply a disinfectant before I visit the farm. And then leaving the farm, I actually wash my boots in soap and water and then disinfect again. So the removal of organic material, biofilms, and other things helps my sanitizers work more effectively. So in fact, some farms actually have signage here, do not enter biosecurity areas. You know, you can always, in fact, lock your doors to your pens and, you know, try to restrict as much traffic as you can. Just to give you an idea what a biofilm looks like, biofilms are organic matter and bacteria, for example, that are on the surface creating what we call fomite. And so this is a biofilm, in fact, that's off of the surface of a catheter. Staphylococcus aureus. Aureus staph infections are very common, and we see them in hospitals a lot. And we also see biofilms, for example, in watering and in feeding equipment as well. And so we, you know, typically try to remove that by several means. The use of soap and water, the idea of scrubbing, the physical action of the brush helps remove these biofilms off the surfaces of things that we're trying to disinfect. So this is just an idea of some of the things that we're up against. So to do this properly, we go through what we call C&D, cleaning and disinfection. And as you can see, I have a big C here because I think that cleaning is more important, in fact, than disinfection. The actual cleaning stage will remove a lot of bacteria and viruses from these surfaces. The disinfectant is going to catch whatever is left behind. So the first thing is to physically remove all organic material, all manure, all litter, everything that you can possibly scrape or sweep away. A lot of times we see people take leaf blowers and blow all the dust down first and then go ahead and shovel everything into a wheelbarrow and get it out of the house. If possible, you can rinse. Hot water rinse is great. And then putting on a soap and scrubbing everything down, rinsing again, and then sanitizing. Now, the best sanitizers I've seen have been those sanitizers that actually sit on the surface that you're trying to sanitize. And so we usually see foaming machinery like this that could be put right on the end of a hose, and it leaves a foam film on the surfaces that you're trying to disinfect. And by increasing contact time, we actually get a higher kill rate of viruses and bacteria. So this disinfection is very important. Simon was asking, how long should birds be kept separate when they come home from a show? A week to 10 days at least, Simon, just to see if they're going to develop any outward signs of any type of disease. That's what I would recommend. At least 7 to 10 days. Any new birds being bought from maybe an auction or another state, for example, you may want to have them held for 2 weeks. It just depends on the type of birds you have. This is a busy slide, but it kind of shows you that there's many different types of chemical disinfectants that we can choose from. And we're always worried about a large variety of different things that can happen there. The big things are basically bacteria and viruses. And so there are different agents across the top that we can use. The most common ones that we usually look at are these 4 because of their cost and their relative effectiveness on common poultry surfaces. The one I use the most, for the most part, is commonly found in most grocery stores. It's Lysol. It's a phenolic compound, and it can be found in both aerosol and in liquid form. And I keep both forms in my car at all times, simply because I can use the excuse me, I can use the spray as a quick disinfectant spray on my boots. But if I have large pieces of equipment or other things that I need to disinfect, inanimate objects, I can use my concentrate and use a large bucket and cover a larger area. Quaternary ammonia compounds, a common one is Rocal. Quaternary ammonia works very effectively against a wide variety of materials. Oxidizers such as Virkon S, those are peroxide-based sanitizers. They work very well. Another common one is simply chlorine bleach. And bleach at a high concentration will kill quite a bit of most of the common viruses and bacteria that we have, if the surface that we're trying to disinfect is absolutely clean. If you use chlorine bleach, you have to remember sometimes it will harden certain plastics, and if they're used in a watering system, you need to make sure that that you follow the watering system, follow the sanitation cycle with a rinse with clear water, so that the birds won't experience a heavy chlorine taste. Sometimes birds will shy away from water that has a high chlorine taste. So then the last layer to think about is our logical layer, and sometimes it's kind of hard to keep in mind, but it needs to be used especially when we think about disease outbreaks and other times when we have sick birds. And this logic model can be a great control if it's properly used. So one of the things that you can think about is when you're working your birds to visit the youngest birds to the oldest birds, and visiting your sick birds last before you leave the premise and go through another washing cycle. You should allow enough downtime between flocks. This is for flocks that you may have an all-in or all-out cycle, or if you have a disease outbreak, of at least a month time. So if I was going to have broiler flocks and I had a sick broiler flock, I would wait at least a month before I would repopulate. And then I would C&D everything that I would have on the premise if there was sickness in the flock. What I mean by sickness, this is meaning that a majority of the birds were sick. And then I would only buy from the National Poultry Improvement Plan certified hatcheries. You can find a listing of that online. And usually hatcheries that are NPIP approved, they usually show a shield or a stamp on their catalogs showing that they have been tested for certain diseases. The other thing to remember too is that you may want to self-quarantine birds that don't look well. So having a hospital pen or a hospital area that you have on your premise is a good idea, just to separate them if they have any type of injury. Now this could be any type of bird that's injured, pecking, any type of injury. Having them in a separate area helps them recover because they're not falling under pecking order pressures or anything else, and that's always good. So self-quarantining those birds will help prevent anything from spreading. And if you do happen to lose a bird and you don't know why, but you always wanted to know, there's usually a diagnostic laboratory within your particular state, and you can contact your local Department of Agriculture representative to find out where the closest diagnostic laboratory can be found. There may be a charge for that, but what I'm suggesting to you is that if you have above normal mortality, saying above 5% of your flock, you may want to go through the process of having a necropsy done simply to see what the agent is that's causing your birds to become sick. If it's something that you can vaccinate against, it might be time to vaccinate the flock. But if it's a bacterial disorder, that tells you that you may need to increase your biosecurity and your C&D to help fight that particular bacteria. So I talked a lot about poultry biosecurity, but you know, this also happens to apply to people as well. And we do teach this to our school children, but even following a protocol of going to the bathroom in a public bathroom actually goes to help prevent you from becoming ill as well. And so the idea of dispensing the towel before you actually start the washing process actually will help you prevent you from becoming sick from using a public area. And I hate to tell you this, but one of the, some of the common fomites that we see around the house is our cell phones, our telephones, and our keyboards. When was the last time you ran a disinfectant wipe over your keyboard, or your telephone for that matter? This is something you handle in your hand, you put up to your face and nose, and then back again. Not very many do. So I'm hoping that everybody will get disinfectant wipes and use them liberally after we're done. Okay, that's my talk on biosecurity. Is there anything, any questions that I can answer for you at this point in time?
Just type your questions into the chat box, and Greg is knowledgeable in a large variety of things related to biosecurity and disease control. If you have any questions on related topics, let us know. We have lots of time.
We have blood testing that we do commercially, just to give you an idea of our avian influenza program here in Pennsylvania. And I know that other counties and other states are doing the same thing. So what do you recommend for someone who goes from farm to farm to do in between? This would have to be things I could bring from my car or truck. Can you add to it a little bit and tell me what you're actually doing? Are you moving birds, or are you just visiting farms? So for example, if I was going to sell, I'm a farm planner who does site visits at different farms. Okay, so you and I have the same issue or problem. And so what I do is I carry coveralls and rubber boots and water and disinfectant and soap with me everywhere I go. So as I visit different farms, I put on this coverall, I put on a disposable nurse's cap, I put on rubber boots and I visit the farm, and I make sure that as I leave the farm, I'm washing back out of the farm, and my disposable coveralls go into a separate bag. So I basically have a clean side and a dirty side to my car. My trunk is dirty, and my inside of the car is clean. I also use rubber floor mats in my car, and of course, being in the Northeast, we always have to worry about snow and water getting into the car. But the rubber floor mat doubles as a washable surface that I can take out of the car at the car wash and wash that as well as the outside of my car. So Nina is asking, is it safe to allow persons who don't have poultry on your farm? I generally have them put on disposable clothing. Yeah, it is usually a good idea from a food safety standpoint to do that. It's always a good idea to do that simply because, again, we don't know where people have been. And so I would either ask them to wash their hands and their shoes before they go into your garden, or to at least put on disposable booties as they enter your location. And yes, don't forget pet birds. Pet birds can be a vector for diseases. As a protocol for me here in Pennsylvania, I do not have any birds whatsoever, simply because I don't want them to become a reservoir for diseases.
Any other questions? Now's your chance.
The worst thing I could do is have something like a gray parrot, and I bring a disease back from some place I visited to my bird. And so I have a bird that I was expecting to live for 80 years die on me because of a pet bird issue somewhere else. So when I retire, I'll have my birds in a small location, and I'll have my signs up saying, you can't go past this point. I'll have a big window so you can look in. That's about it.
Any other questions?
Jennifer is typing. Corey is typing. With the avian flu outbreak, how far would I go separating species? Well, zoonosis is a problem that we have, and there are diseases that are traded between waterfowl and chickens, and between chickens and turkeys. And so I would probably keep those three classes separate if I could. Keeping turkeys away from everybody, keeping chickens away, and keeping them to themselves. If I had pigeons, for example, I would have pigeons separated from everybody else as well. So, having those separate would help. We do have some people that show here in Pennsylvania that has what I would call the Noah's Ark farm, where they do have a little bit of everything. But we try to encourage those folks to keep them what we call compartmentalized, where we have the turkeys far, far away from the chickens, and the chickens far, far away from the waterfowl. Okay, Jennifer writes, I can't remember if it was the avian influenza biosecurity for backyard flock owners course on the extension website or someplace else, but it was suggested that people wipe behind their ears before visiting a flock. Why specifically?
That's a good one. I never heard that.
I have never heard that before. Simply put, it's probably one of the least places that's usually washed when you're taking a shower. I typically wash behind my ears when I shower, but if it is a flock of high value to you, what I could suggest to them is that they actually shower in and shower off the farm. We do this commercially, where an employee will actually walk into the farm. He goes into a locker room takes off his street clothes, he goes through a shower, he enters the locker room on the other side of the showers, and he puts on scrubs, and he works the entire day in scrubs and footwear that stays there at the farm, and he reverses the process as he exits the farm. So this shower in, shower out is a way of reducing, anything that's coming onto the farm. They have been the video on the USDA biosecurity bird site. Well, that might be true. It could be possible there, but it also with a disinfectant wipe. I keep
One thing that always gets forgotten is baseball.
Yes, there are other videos on site. The USDA biosecurity for the bird site is there. Yes. How far would I go to locking all the birds inside? I think there's room at the table for everybody to raise birds in their own fashion. I'm a big fan of confinement rearing simply because I don't like to see commingling of wild birds with domestic birds. But that doesn't necessarily negate them from being outside. So I'm a big fan of hoop structures and netted tractors or bird tractors that can be pulled through a pasture, for example, and having it big enough for your flock so that they could enjoy being outside, but yet are not going to get commingling with English sparrows, for example, that might be getting into their food and transferring disease. So the other thing to remember too, in pastured areas, that you can have full sun. If you have a full sun exposure, you're actually getting some disinfectant properties from the irradiation from the sun. And so if your pasture is in full sun for most of the day, it's pretty much sterilizing what you have there as they're moving through those pastures. So as long as you have adequate airflow and a netted area to where it's going to exclude wildfowl from mingling with your birds, you can have a modified type of confinement area.
Protection from predators is always important too.
That is true. And as we all know, that predators can carry disease too. So we've seen this especially with raccoons and rabies, for example.
Although chickens can't get rabies.
Of course. But they draw raccoons to your area, so you're in trouble.
Yep. Got a few more people typing. Sorry to hear about your cold there, Greg.
Well, that's just the least of my worries. I'm going to tell you offline what happened to me. I'm almost catching up to you, kid.
That's a bad thing.
It is a bad thing. Okay, Nina is still typing.
Yeah.
We have a few minutes more here.
Yeah, we got some time.
For those of you who this is your first time here, there are other Learn webinars at the learn.extension.org site. If you put in poultry, you'll find all of the poultry titles that we have had. We've had many different ones. We just had one on housing, one on avian influenza, and of course, today's talk here. And we're going to have another one coming up soon as well, correct?
Yeah, we have one tomorrow on health concerns for egg-laying flocks.
There you go.
But all of the webinars, future, current, and past, are all on the extension.org/poultry website, so you can link to them all there, sorted out by when they happen. But yeah, we have a call it a egg production um, series that we've been having. Um, and so the health problems with the um, concerns for egg layers is on February 11th, which is tomorrow, and next month it's managing egg layer flocks. So um, there is also a avian influenza webinar coming up that that is more on a national outlet, not Washington State alone. And February 27th, what's new with bird flu, coming out of Maryland actually is the presentation. Um, we wanted to get ours up and running fast because of the backyard flocks that were having avian influenza out in Washington State and other states, California, Oregon, Idaho, Nevada. But there's one that will be discussing bird flu a little bit more. Okay, you have another question there.
Okay, Nina, we were patient. We got you in here. So here's your question. You're talking about your farm has mixed species there, guineas, turkeys, and peafowl, some waterfowl as well as chickens. And you have tractors and free-range birds and closed cooping as well, and it makes it hard to maintain biosecurity, especially when people stop and look over the fence, I guess, as you are on a tourist route. So how can we help boost your level of biosecurity? Here's a couple of things I would recommend. One is range rotation. Range rotation is used to help reestablish any vegetation that you may have, but it also puts a time barrier in your flock exposures to a certain area. And so if you have enough room to do this, that's what I would recommend. We used to do this with turkeys to help prevent certain diseases in turkeys. And so the idea of range rotation is very important. When we speak of tractors, I always encourage people to move tractors based on what they're standing on versus the calendar. A lot of people tell me that they move their tractors twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that's all they do. And I'm looking at a slick mess that they're standing in. So if you watch what your birds are standing in, you're going to have a better chance of maintaining a nice dry pen. So move your birds as you see their footing becoming a little wet or a little slick, because that's a good harborage for bacteria to start growing. As far as the loose birds, you can fence them with temporary fencing if you wish, or you just go with the idea that you have loose birds. If you can contain them, that might be a little more helpful, especially if you find yourself with sick birds from certain pens that might be commingling with these loose birds as well. People is a different thing. One thing to do is maybe use signs to help both promote your farm and to help restrict people from walking in too far. I know this is real common, especially when we have small farms that are selling product off their farms. You may want to say, you know, welcome to our farm, and then as you go farther into your farm, then you say stop, or you know, employees only, or something like that that might help hinder them. On some farms that I've worked at before, they actually put fencing up, and so you could drive onto the farm to a certain point, and then you're challenged with fencing that only the farmers had keys to get through the gates. So that's one way of helping with of limiting visitors to the farm.
Other question.
Depends on, okay, they're talking about biosecurity, anything special one could do with the spot left after moving the tractor. It depends on how much material is left after moving the tractor. It might not hurt to take a rake, a steel rake, and to break up the material to help it dry a little bit faster. So if you have a big pile of manure that you just moved off of and you're moving into a cleaner area with your tractor, you may want to help just pull that manure apart to help it dry, because drying actually is a good way of reducing bacteria within that manure and helping it decompose a little bit faster. And then as it
sunshine.
rains, it'll help wash that manure back into the soil. You don't want to leave a concrete chunk sitting there of manure.
Do we have any last questions? Not seeing anybody typing, I will assume that we don't have any questions, and we'll let Greg go so that he can go and deal with his cold or whatever it is that you're battling there.
It's probably a cheap
Hopefully,
microphone that you're hearing more than anything else, so sorry about that.
I hope you're feeling better soon.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for participating. As I said, there's one tomorrow on health concerns for laying hens as part of our egg production series. Please check us out on Facebook. We have all of our upcoming webinars, as well as when the recordings are all available, as well as any news items or when new extension articles are written on e-extension. So check us out. And thank you very much for coming. And I hope to see you again on another webinar. Thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.